do it. Hello, hello. We have audio. So why don't we sit on this side of the room? Because apparently we only have one speaker. Also, this mic is super hot. Can we? Hey, Mark. I'll just talk quietly. I won't eat the mic. Yeah. Requesting strongly. All right. Welcome, everybody. Do we have any new people? Has anybody not been to? Hi, welcome. Everybody say hi to him. Yeah. Make sure to go talk to him. Welcome. All right. So, yeah, we have a presentation later by Mark LaCroix. This is a talk that he did at MDev, and I hear it's pretty cool. So afterwards, we're going to do a couple announcements, and if you have something to plug, that kind of thing, and then we'll have Mark talk, and then we will hang out for a little while, depending on how long, and then we'll go somewhere like food and drinks somewhere. Oftentimes it's oftentimes it's Applebee's, but stay tuned to figure out where we're going. Yes, and so it's important to say that we aim to be safe and inclusive. We do have a safe event policy on the website there. If you ever have any issues or concerns or requests, that kind of thing, get in touch with somebody on the board or a volunteer, that kind of thing. Go ahead. We're all volunteer. This is our recently elected board. Is Beth here yet? Where's Beth? Oh, she's watching the door. That's nice. We also have volunteers. There you go. Yeah, this could be you. Yeah. Cool. Next. So all of our, is this my, go back? Cool, there we go. Why are you, are you messing with me right now? Yeah, so we have a lot of events, usually on Wednesdays. First event of the month was last week. That's my event. Who doesn't know about that event? Like, we play board games. It's here. It's lots of fun. Second Wednesday, this event. You're here. Third Wednesday is Mark's and Dale's event over at Noble Robot, where it's a playtest event, where people bring their games to get playtested by random people. And then the fourth Wednesday is our VR HCI event, which is at REM 5. And then we also have a couple, hit that button, there you go. We have a couple special interest groups. We have Women in Games that is on the third, Saturday, that's new. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so now you can volunteer for cats on Friday, and then you can hang out with women on Saturday. Awesome. And then the fourth Saturday is People of Color Get Together. That is done by Stephen McGregor. And if you have any other questions about that, just post in the Discord. Is anyone not in the Discord? You're not in the Josh, you're in the Discord. Yeah. Oh, really? Okay. Oh, yeah. Why do we even have Eastern time on there? I don't know. We'll figure that out. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, get in the Discord if you're not in the Discord. And we also, on the Discord, we have project channels on there. So this is if you don't want to have the overhead of like having an entire Discord server, you can request a channel there for your game that is out or in development. And we're getting a lot of them on there now. Oh, also we have swag. This is pretty recent. This is, yes. Which I see Josh has a shirt. I forgot to wear mine again. Oh, yep. There we go. They're pretty great shirts. What was that? Yeah, we do need more shirts. Yes. Yeah, and one thing on that is like all the proceeds go to just funding like our holiday party and other IGDA events. Yeah. All right. And then do we have any plugs here? I know that was somebody here that wanted to talk about 2DCon, or did we? No, VGMCon. That's next. Yeah, it's like next weekend, right? Awesome. Yeah, check that out. I guess nobody. Yeah, come on up. What? Please? Oh, yeah. Yeah, Robert Frost III is going to be talking at Stout tomorrow, an audio talk. And I hear it's cool. Sounds good. You did. Yeah. At Stout, at the University of Stout. Oh, okay. Can you post the link? Awesome. Yeah. Cool. Any other announcements? I swear somebody had one, but maybe they're not here yet. That's okay. Well, let's go like right to the talk. Yeah. Come on up, Mark. I don't know if we have a mic stand. Sorry, no mic stand. I'll be your stand.
No, it's okay. I got it. Thank you. Getting set up here. Wait for my screen to show up. Well, I'll start my pre-thing. I actually do have a little bit of a plug. My podcast, Nice Games Club, which some of you may know about, nicegames.club. We just did, we did GDC. We did a bunch of content for GDC, which ended a couple weeks ago. And we've already released 2 episodes where we talk all about it. And tomorrow, part 3 of 3 will be out, which is going to be a couple of interviews we did with the Director of Operations of Midwest Games, and then a producer at Limited Run Games, talking a little bit about a project of theirs that's pretty interesting. So that's kind of 2 interviews in 1 episode. That's going to be out tomorrow. Nice Games Club, find it wherever you get your podcasts, and at nicegames.club. And there you go. That's a bit of that. Now we will go ahead on to my presentation. Okay, so it's called Your Game Has a Message, Did You Write It? I think you can kind of figure out what I'm getting at just from the title, but I'll describe it in detail in a moment. A little bit about me, if you don't already know. I'm an indie dev from around here. I'm also a former graphic designer, film editor, animator, and recovering filmmaker. So a lot of what I've done throughout my career has been multidisciplinary. And so a lot of my approach to film and games has always been from that perspective, right? So when I started making games, I wasn't really that interested in making like things with a lot of cutscenes because I'd done that already. I wanted to use the thing about games that were special to tell stories. And so a lot of why I do anything is about narrative, it's about messaging, it's about impact. And so that's my bias. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about comes from that sort of theory that games should be about something. If you want to argue with me about that, that's fair game, and we can have that argument, because I think it's a reasonable argument to have. I might not be right in all cases on that, but that's where I'm coming from with this. So that's keep that in mind. I'm the creator and co-host of Nice Games Club. Talked about that in a minute. I'm a board member for the chapter here. You know all about that from the intro. And I'm the creator of Noble Engine. That's a little game engine that I made for the Playdate, little handheld console. It's a really easy platform to get started making games, but I put together a framework to make it even easier. So I recommend that if you're trying to do something for a game jam, or you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed by, trying to do a first big project in a big engine. It's a good way to get started on like first principles. My little company is Noble Robot. I make games. I also publish games that I port. And I'm also run the Noble Robot Space, which we host some of our events at. It's a co-working space as well. So if you want a desk there, come talk to me after. It's incredibly cheap, and it's the best neighborhood in Minneapolis. All right. What to expect from this talk? I sort of laid out the thesis a little bit, but we'll get into that as we go. The main thing is that you don't have to accept my thesis yet or ever. I think you'll still be able to get something out of what I talk about from the examples that I cite. It's going to be 3 case studies. And each case study is going to have some questions. So I'm going to prompt you with, like, what does this mean? How do you think about this? And the idea is that it's a sort of Socratic seminar. So keep your answers to yourself for now. But after the talk, I want you to share them with anyone who will listen. And I want to open up a discussion. That's the key about this. Because my premise is about how to approach these things. It's not really the answers to the questions that I'm going to offer. All right, so the thesis. Hey, everybody, remember ludonarrative dissonance? Yep, that's exactly right. It was a term coined in 2007, and we all got tired of hearing about it around 2015, I think, which is a long time ago now. But the idea is that your gameplay betrays what your narrative is trying to say, right? That's the dissonance between the ludo and the narrative. It's very cute, it's very fun, but I also think that we're sick of the term because it was overused, but I think that says more about games than it does about the term, frankly. I think it's still a valuable structure by which to view things, and I think we're all like, yeah, all games sort of, you kill a bunch of guys and then the cutscene has you crying over the death of one person, blah, 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 we get it. But I feel like, no, that's a huge problem, everybody. Like, I think we're really comfortable with those sorts of things, and I think using it as a to your advantage is okay, right? There's no reason that your gameplay has to align perfectly with your story. That's hopefully not what people take away from that concept. But that dissonance is still something really valuable, and I think we've dismissed it a little bit too quickly because we pointed at every game in the universe and said, this all has this problem. And then the result we took from that was like, well, then it must not really be a problem then. And I think that's the wrong thing that we took from it. Because meaning is hardly ever delivered by story alone, right? If you have a really, really compelling story, and you see this in AAA a lot where those departments are very much separated from each other, you have this incredible story, and you only ever see it in the cutscenes. I think that's a problem. It doesn't make the story worse. It just confines the story to the story parts of the game. And I think that is short-sighted as an industry. Because mechanics, that's the goal, that's the power we have as games, is to make things and say things with gameplay. So, example people use, Uncharted story, lovable rogue who murders 1,000 people, that we're sort of okay with that. But the game's intended message is not about not killing people, right? You don't walk away from that game with a message of nonviolence. So, like, is it really a problem that he murders 1,000 people and they don't talk about it? Like, maybe it's not really a problem. But if it's not really a problem, what is it then, right? What does that confusion do for us? What does it say to us? And why can't we make a game that has that dissonance, but then we can say something with that dissonance, right? It's not just about saying, oh, people will put up with it. Oh, it's okay. It's the language of games. Like, great. Let's have those things be different. Let's make them even contradictory. But like, let's do it on purpose, right? Let's not just do it by accident. I think The Last of Us is a better example of something that really does have a lot of ludonarrative dissonance in it. It's basically this story about how killing is wrong. That's a core function of it. It's so torturous, but you have to kill people to get through, to complete the mission, to save humanity, or to decide not to. To be able to sort of put yourself in that position, you need to do horrible things, and that changes you as a person. But man, that game is fun. Like, killing people is so much fun in that game, and sneaking up and choking them out, or sniping them off, or running away, and oh, my heart is beating, but then I'm gonna kill them all. Like, that's a fun game, and it doesn't take anything away from how fun that game is, that the story doesn't just support that, and it doesn't really take any away from the story that the game is really fun, but it does mean that those things do not support each other in a way that I think is kind of embarrassing, and it's embarrassing that we lavish so much praise on a game like that, because those two halves are both stellar, but because they don't really align, I feel like we should be interrogating that a little bit more. Games are designed to develop iteratively, right? If it's not fun, you gotta make it fun. You gotta make changes. But what happens when you playtest, you QA, the game's getting better, it's getting more polished, the story's coming across clearer, because you're not just QAing the mechanics, you're QAing everything about it, or playtesting. But what happens when the message gets in the way of your other goals? I wanna make a really fun game, but I also wanna say a thing. But man, when that message gets across to people, they are having no fun. So that's the choice you have to make. All right, that's the thesis. Again, take it or leave it. I'm going to lay it out here in 3 case studies. The first one is chess. This is a great image I have, but it's the only one I could find that has any relationship to chess. But your slide's got to be compelling. Question? I don't know. I mean, you'll have to ask past Mark about that. Okay. Chess is a war game. That's pretty well known. The genre is abstract strategy, so it's, pieces on a board. But chess is less abstract. Even though chess is like the abstract strategy game, it's less abstract than most abstract strategy games, right? Checkers is more meaningfully abstract than chess is, because chess has characters that you can embody meaning to, and it has a narrative, and it has, it has story, and it's a war game. So it's a war game that teaches empathy. So what it does is, in order to be good at chess, you need to know what the other player is going to do. And in order to know what the other player is going to do, you got to put yourself in their shoes. You have to imagine that you only know what they know. You also have to imagine what they know that you don't know. That requires an incredible human superpower of empathy, right? In order to be good at chess, you have to be an incredibly empathetic human. You need an appreciation of the goals and perspectives. You need to know that I'm going to try this gambit, but if I'm them, are they going to fall for it? And I have to imagine a scenario where they do, and imagine a scenario where they don't. And I have to think, what do I know about this person from our encounter, or from if it's a friend you're playing against, and how can I leverage that and know what they're feeling and how they're thinking based on what I've done, independent of what I know about the situation. That becomes a skill. And that's a skill you can apply in the rest of your life, right? It's Sun Tzu's shit, right? Like, know your enemy. So that's one half of it. But it leads me to the sort of conclusion of this thing, because I used to think this was a really powerful thing when I understand this concept. Like, oh, that's amazing. Chess can really make you a better human being. Except it doesn't really teach it like a philosophy, because famously, high-level chess players are like jerkwads. That's like a cliche. It's not always true, but it's kind of always true, right? You hear this a lot, and part of it is because high-level chess players make chess their whole lives. They lack the social skills that you get, that you could be very good at with the skills of chess, but if you spend no time on that, so it's this weird contradiction, the way that chess works, because it's not a team sport, right? The winners will stand alone. So even though you spend a lot of time thinking about what other people think, you never really think about the philosophy of their perspective, right? You will just think about the strategy of their perspective. So it's like misplaced knowledge, and I think that can turn you into a jerkwad. So was chess designed to hone bad attitudes as well as strategic minds? Like, I really don't think so. You'd have to go back hundreds of years, but I can't imagine that was anybody's intent as the game evolved, because it wasn't always the way it was. The history of chess is super fascinating. So here's my question. So this is the thing. I'm going to run through these. I'm going to show them all at the same time. Start thinking about this. What would a really proper empathetic chess even look like? Would it even still be a competitive game? Maybe it's a team game where you are not allowed to communicate with a player who is on your side, but you need to use those skills. What other unexpected games can you extract meaning from? Like, does Pong say anything to you? Does Asteroids, Space Invaders, right? Are these games that were, sort of famously designed very quickly around very tight technical constraints? Do they teach us skills or messages or philosophies that we didn't understand them to be intended to do? Wait on the light. Thank you, thank you. Is it okay for your game to not want to say anything? So this is definitely true of abstract strategy games. The discipline of making those types of games very often is about not wanting to think of anything other than the abstract strategy. Is that even possible to do? Could you make a game that there's no way you can extract any meaning from? And what work do you have to do to make sure that those whatever lessons you don't want to teach are not taught? And what happens if you discover that your game says something you didn't expect? Do you try to, this isn't what I wanted to say at all, right? Do you want to change it? You say, you know what? This is actually kind of interesting. It was almost the opposite of what I was trying to say, but it's interesting also. It's better. Let's lean into it. But in order, I think, to answer that question, you need to have a really good literacy of your own work. And I think that's something that we don't take seriously enough as designers. So think about these questions, jot them down, ignore the rest of the talk. If you've got something really in your mind on one of these and you really want to talk about it later, they're there for you. All right, case number 2, Super Mario Bros. Wii. It's a Mario game, I love it, I love all Mario games. Co-op Mario, super cool. No playable Princess Peach, famously, you got them 2 toads. But the reason for that is because Peach is kidnapped again. Okay, fine, it's a Mario game. They didn't want to make too many changes to the formula. The co-op was, excuses, right? So, Blue and Yellow Toad, they just solved that equation, right? We're not gonna, that's what they decided to do. Instead of saying, they wanted to have Yoshi be rideable, so they couldn't make Yoshi the 4th player. I think they invented Nabbit later on, or they didn't quite make Nabbit a playable character yet. This is just where they landed. So that's fine as far as it goes, right? I don't think that's a good excuse, frankly, but setting aside the fact that Peach is kidnapped again, making a game 4-player co-op actually changes what that means. It doesn't just mean that Peach is kidnapped again, because it's not impossible. You can't ban all stories where a man saves a woman, right? Like, there's context to that, but like just saying you can't do that anymore isn't really the solution. I think Mario should stop doing it, and they have. But 4-player co-op makes that something else. The problem really isn't that Peach is missing, it's the blue toad and the existence of Super Mario Bros. 2, where Peach is a playable character. That was a reskin game, everyone knows that story, but Peach has been a playable character before. So we all know that history, even if you never played that game. So this game says, when forming a party of heroes, a photocopy of a man is preferable to a woman who has previously excelled in the role. That is what this game literally says to its players. And I doubt that's on purpose, but that is horrendous of a message to take away from it. But it's the first thing I thought of when I saw that lineup. Because the context matters. It's no longer about who needs rescuing, because that's a complicated conversation and that's been talked to death. It's about who gets to even be a 4th-rate hero. Like, Peach wasn't good enough, so they photocopy of Toad. That's awful. It really is awful. And I think it's unforgivable is what it is. I still love this game. So let's think about where Nintendo was thinking about this, right? Did they intend to say that? I mean, I can't imagine they did, right? But this is part of the reason why I think they've done a lot more course correction in recent years. There are 3 playable women characters in Super Mario Bros. Wonder. And if you want to be really generous about the duplicated characters, like all the Toads and the Yoshis, it's actually roughly even gender split. Again, you have to be very generous to have that opinion. I still think it's not. But Mario's an old franchise. It's a big change for that franchise to do that. So that was very intentional. But this isn't narrative, right? This isn't story. How is like character select a mechanic? Like, or rather, this is setting. This is story. This is the paintbrush that goes over the mechanics, right? So how is the character select a mechanic in the game? Because I think you could have a very reasonable argument to say that it's arbitrary, right? All the player abilities are the same. There's really no difference between them. But I think when you think about Mario Wonder, there's this great quote about including Daisy as a playable character. They already wanted to include Peach, but they basically said that including Daisy will help resolve fights within my own household, one of the designers said, because it wasn't just about a playable character as a woman, because only one person gets to be Peach. It's about the scarcity of female characters. And they caught that. And they said, like, we can't just put a woman in the game and that's going to check the box and we'll be fine now, because it's still a problem. And that is gameplay. When you have 2 people on a couch fighting over who gets to pick what, they are in the middle of playing that game. And that's part of the experience. And that's the kind of thing when you think about when you're designing your games and you're building your games, that none of that's in code, none of that is in your assets, but that is part of your game. And you have to think about your game in a more holistic, contextual space, rather than just what goes into the project, I think. And this is an example where they're moving in the right direction, considering the failure of previous titles. Okay, batch of questions here. What other narrative elements can you think of that are actually sort of game mechanics in disguise? Is narrative and gameplay really that different? I think you're getting probably hints from my talk so far that I think that they are all one and the same. But there's a debate that they really are different, right? Treating them as one and the same maybe muddies things up. But how different are they? In what ways are they different, other than expression, right? Is it okay to make a game less fun in service of a message, right? Or maybe make a narrative less compelling or less impactful? If you want to say something with your game about a particular issue you care about, this is beyond a story you want to tell. If you want to deliver meaning and you want to change people's minds, if you want to make a political game, what's the duty you have to the player to give them a good experience? Or can you make anything fun, right? Is that not a barrier? Could you be confident enough to say that anything could be said and still make a banger, right? Is fun the point of games? I think people have talked about that in the past. I think there's a lot to be said about the unexplored territory of interactive media that is not designed purely for dopamine delivery or purely to bum you the fuck out, because those seems to be the two things we decide when we do interactive art. We're like, let's not make a fun game. Let's make a crushing game that really, makes you reflect on your stupid life. Like, it can't, those are extremes, I think. And that's that's the space we're playing in. This is a young medium, and I think when people get really insecure about games versus film or novels or other types of art, they go, well, games make way more money than film, so blah, blah, blah. But all of that is just insecurity, because I think we know deep down that games are a pretty young, immature art form. And I think it is really our duty to try to move it forward the best we can, or at least talk about how we could, because I think none of us really have the tools yet, because it's a young medium. So there's saying what you want versus not saying what you don't want to say. And this is, some of the talking a little bit about chess comes back here. How do you prevent your game from saying something you don't intend it to, right? What should you spend more time on? Delivering the message you want, or guarding against interpretations you're not really interested in? How worried about that should you be? And are there ways to make that process easier? And how big does your message have to be, right? And how small could you make it? Is it your duty as an artist to say big things? I don't think so, but it's a lot of power we have as artists. So maybe you need to use the opportunity. Maybe you don't want your game to be about much. You want it to be about one little thing. That doesn't mean you spend a little effort on it, right? I mean, maybe you think, maybe it is. That's why it's on the question slide. All right, case 3. This is a realistic kissing simulator. Who here has heard of that game? Just 2, okay. It was a little indie hit. It got a lot of press attention, but not a lot of people played it, and that's sort of the classic example. Fair warning, I'm gonna come down on this game pretty hard, and I just want to preface it by saying it had a lot of good intentions, but I think the execution is flawed, and I'm going to get into why. It's a game about sexual consent. It's a big, big topic, right? Both players must press start to proceed. If one player doesn't press start, the game cannot continue. There can be no realistic kissing. Like that, what a powerful idea, right? Honestly, that alone is the whole thing, right? You don't need to play the game. You get the message, right? And it's a very strong message. But you are compelled to consent. Because if you don't, you can't play this game. That's a bit of an irony, right? If you say no, the game will restart, and they'll ask again, and again. And it'll not stop asking until you walk away or say yes. What does that say to you as a player? If both players don't maintain the kiss during gameplay, the game will end. And this makes a lot of sense, right? Because withdrawing consent is not a permanent state, right? I think a lot of people, I'm not going to get into these details. I'm not really qualified to talk about that too much, but that's an important concept. Someone says yes, you should keep checking with them, right? That doesn't give you carte blanche, for the rest of the encounter. And this game simulates that. If you stop kissing someone and enough of a beat passes where you don't re-engage, the game's over. Kiss is done. Makes a lot of sense. But denying or withdrawing consent is mechanically treated exactly the same as losing a game. That is how it feels. And this is more than me just saying it. I'm going to play a couple of examples. These are essentially clips from every single Let's Play, every single one I could find online. I could figure out how to hit this play bar. There we go.
Would you like to kiss me? Invite a kiss. What happens if I say no? No. What? What? Great. Best game ever.
I think the boy's gonna say no. Watch, it's gonna be like, thanks for playing. Oh my god. Oh my god, wait, no, I was kidding. Thanks for playing. Oh my gosh.
No, yeah, yeah, no, yeah.
Don't hurt my feelings.
No. Oh, game's over. Okay, so apparently I have to play this fucking game. Friends like can't walk away, I have to actually play the fucking game. So
Would you like to kiss me? And then... no. Okay. And that's the end of the game. No, just kidding. All right. Would you like to kiss me? And then obviously, Pink Lady would say, yes, I would.
This game's so hard to say yes and shit. Finally.
Sometimes I'm like, oh, they're done. Thanks for playing. That was it? Alright.
Wouldn't that be the best? It would just be some moth. Oh, thanks for... I'm not done yet. You call that a kiss?
Yeah, go in. Yeah, don't push me away, honey. Oh, no, she went for the kiss herself. God damn it. God, I'm such a tease, aren't I? Oh, yeah.
So you can see the natural inclination to,
This is,
you know,
yeah, that's right.
go in
Come
this
closer
direction
now.
for the humor.
Yeah, you
right?
like it, don't you? Oh, God, this tongue is so sexy. What? I didn't even kiss anyone. How is that a victory? Can I go down her throat? Not that I would want to. Okay, don't do that, kids. All right. Yeah, she's hesitating a little bit. Come here, honey. Come here, honey. Don't you worry.
So you can see the
This is
role-playing
gonna be really
opportunities are
that-
legion
what?
and are not always what
Why
the
does all my
developer
other
intended.
things not work then? I don't understand at all. Maybe I'm missing the point here. I don't know.
I covered it all. See, what I want to know is, did I win before, like, when it said thanks for playing, or was it just like, you're wasting my time, you're not trying hard enough?
So you see some bad faith interpretations in there from one example in particular, but a couple of like good faith attempts to understand what this game is about. That last example is pretty telling. Like, was it just that I wasn't trying hard enough? Like, that is horrible. And that person is not a horrible person, right? But that's the meaning they got from it. The couple that was playing together earlier, that one really struck me as well, as the one was teasing the consent. Yes, no, yes, no, yes, no, which itself is pretty troubling. The other partner said, you know, don't hurt my feelings by saying no. Like, that's what this game means to people. And that really, really scares me, because this game was heavily lauded in the press because of its premise, because of that first thing. Both players have to press start in order for the game to play. What a powerful idea. What an incredible aim for your game to teach people. And frankly, I think it's a good thing that this game people know about this game mostly through reading about it than actually playing it, because the gameplay does not support that message. In fact, it very, very strongly says the opposite in many situations. And that's the power that we have as developers. And when we want to say something important, that's the minefield you're in, right? That's the duty you have, to treat those subjects with respect and to understand your clever idea, how that's really going to play out in the real world. So I'm worked up about that. Maybe you're not. I did hear some chuckles in the crowd. I won't judge you for that, for some of those clips. But here's the questions. Are you responsible? Is it really your responsibility for how an audience interprets your work? And if that's true, and maybe it's not, but is there an upper limit to that? Can you really be blamed for someone whose experience is such that they are just geared to see your work in a way that's dangerous? Is that really, do you really have to account for all cases? How much of that misinterpretation risk is acceptable? Because sometimes when you want to say things really strongly, you need to say them subtly. And so you have to decide, this might not land, and am I okay if it doesn't? Because if you take from my talk that these are scary things to try, is that a chilling effect? Does that say, well, dang, if that's going to happen, I don't know that I should touch this? Maybe you're like, well, I need to go to, I need to audit 3 seminars on this substance-sensitive topic at the local university before I'm ready to approach this as an artist. Is that a fair thing to tell game developers? I mean, I'm kind of telling people that, but I don't think it's a fair thing to tell them. So it's not, I don't have an answer. What is unique about games' ability to convey meaning? Because one of the things about interactive arts is, it's no secret to people, but it puts you in the position to play out elements of story. And that includes games with no story, right? It's your story. The experience of you playing it is a story. And how you interact, and how you feel about yourself, and how you feel about characters that you play, topics you engage with. So what are the unique abilities that games have that other media don't? And what are the unique challenges? Because in a film, things are a lot more locked down. There are fewer, you don't know what the person in the audience is thinking, but you always know what's going to come next on the screen. And you can dance a little closer to the edge because you always have control over where it lands, right? So, I think this is a really interesting question. As someone who came from film and is making games, but still has a lot of ideas for what would make good films, but I don't make films anymore. So must you choose the correct medium for your message? Is it actually a bad thing to tell a film, quote unquote, story in a game or vice versa? Or is it really just use the tools you've got? I would say that every piece of art is inefficient. There's probably much more efficient ways that you could put a team of scientists on any piece of art. They could come up with a faster, better, more efficient way to say what it needed to say in that medium or another. But who cares, right? It's like the point of view of the artist matters. Or is it something you should be thinking more about? I had this great idea, it's incredible, but you know what? I don't write novels, so I'll do something else. Is that a sacrifice that you make? Or is it a sacrifice to your potential audience who won't get to see that from you? When you develop your artistic voice in games, think about that compared to other media. Is that something, oh, I want to make a roguelike, or I want to make a platformer, oh, I've never made this before, I've never made that before. I think we as game designers, as a class, are much more interested in novelty, in trying things we've never tried before, and also, at the same time, honing what we're really good at. But I think we don't talk about what that means for our artistic voice. When you make something really good, and then you want to make something next, what is it you're hoping to do? Are you hoping to say, well, you know what? I think this will get more player engagement. I think I can make this but bigger. I think I can make this but smaller and more refined. But do you think about, I'm going to make this, but the things I've been saying, I'm going to see if I could say them better. I hear that from nobody. And I don't know if I don't think it's not true for game developers. I think a lot of us do feel that way. I just don't think we use that language. We don't talk about games as an art form. We just say that they're art. And that's something that I think we could do better at. And is there anything you just can't say in games? And if there isn't, has anybody tried? Can you test that theory? Is interactive media something that there's a certain thing you want to say? Is there any topic where you could say, hey, you know what? Any form of interactivity will dilute what I want to say with this. And so it's definitely off limits for games. Is there anything that's true of? I mean, maybe. I don't know that it is, but I think there's reason to be optimistic that that's not the case. But also maybe there's a reason to be deliberate and thoughtful and say maybe you want the right tool for the job. So I'm really of two minds about a lot of this third batch of questions. And I'm really curious to see what all of you think about it. So that is it. That's my whole deal. If anyone has questions now, we're still on the stream. We can talk about it. Anything stand out to you? Anything you're not sure of? Trenton's coming over with the microphone.
All right, so full disclosure, I am a longtime chess player, so I had some very interesting thoughts about what you were stating about chess and how it was presented as a war game, but also how high-level players are often viewed as jerks, to use your terminology.
Sure.
That said, do you think it's necessarily a byproduct of playing chess that develops players that are jerks?
That's a really good question, because it might, because when I say high level, I'm talking about grandmasters, the few celebrities in the chess world. That's kind of the era, that's the cliche I'm talking about, right?
Yep.
And I think this is another area of mine, which is about like high level competition, the sort of be better at all costs. Now, how much of the cliche about chess players is attributable to the qualities of chess versus the fact that it's incredibly high stakes and incredibly high competition level? But I think that quality is not found in as many other categories that has that. But I think there is a mix. So I think you're right to bring it up, because I wouldn't say it's 100% due to the game. But I think the game does allow for that in a way that it doesn't necessarily have to. But, I don't have any thoughts on that. I'm not here to critique chess. It's pretty well honed and optimized as an experience, and I quite like it myself.
Yeah, and I bring it up because for myself, I consider myself a very empathic person, and on that note, I found it really interesting how you drew that parallel with chess being taught as an empathy thing, because in thinking about it, that made me realize, maybe that did have an influence on how I became such an empathic person. But for me, not that I'm necessarily grandmaster level, I'm not claiming that, but the way I view chess is such that I definitely need to understand what the other person is doing, but I'm also at a point where my goal coming into it is I'm going to do the best that I can, and if that means I lose, so be it.
Right. And I think that's something, my theory is that that's something that people, because I believe people are good as a default quality, right? I think people start out good, that's their default position. I think that's something you have to hold on to. I think that those environments can challenge you to hold on to that notion of like, I'm only competing against myself, and I'm gonna make sure that when we shake hands, because that's part of the rules, I'm not gonna just do it perfunctorily like I've seen on television, where they don't really mean it. I'm gonna really, when I say good game, I'm really gonna mean it. I think that's something you do have to fight to hold on to.
Yeah, I would concur. Yeah, not really any other point, just an interesting topic that I wanted to tease out.
Yeah, but that's broader. When you think about games when you're trying to make games that are highly competitive, that are skill-based, that are multiplayer, think about what you're putting your players through in order to do that, right? The more data you give them about their performance, the more opportunities you give them to get just a little bit better, the more perfect your system is, so that it's not accountable to randomness or to input lag. The more that the player can blame themselves or blame another player, the more perfect your competitive environment is, the fewer barriers there are to someone just going, it's just a game. And is that what you want, or is that not what you want?
Yeah, and I think those are definitely worthwhile questions to think about, so I think it's good to bring these things up and tease them out.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else have questions or thoughts?
Can you? Did we have a question over there?
You don't have a question? Oh, no, go first.
Oh. So, on your second point about Peach, I saw that in real life. So, I'm married, I have 3 kids, they're now grown up now, but when they played Gauntlet, do you remember Gauntlet?
Oh, yeah.
My wife always had to play the sorceress because she was a woman. And it was interesting like that. Or another conversation was they're in the minivan driving, and this is when the second series of Star Wars came out. Sorry. But they're like, oh, I'm Ben Kenobi, and I'm, whatever his name was, Darth Vader, before he became Darth Vader. Anakin Skywalker. And my wife goes, well, who am I? Well, you're Princess Amidala, Mom. It always was a gender role thing. So they were learning it through film. They were learning it through games. and so I can really see your point. And even to the point where there was times where they question, can you do that, Mom, because you're a woman? Because they just of the stimulation they were getting from TV and shows.
Yeah.
And so I can see where that point is coming from. But I also can see where games where people get the wrong message from it when you start it out. It's very, very hard to control that message. It's like I've heard from authors and filmmakers that once you, and musicians, is once you create a song and release it, it's no longer yours. It's whatever that person thinks of it is, good or bad.
Yeah,
So.
yeah. And yeah, if you believe in death of the author, then make sure you think about what you leave when you're dead, right? And yeah, it's hard to know what that is. And particularly, yeah, when it comes to representation, I think one of the things that people really struggle with, and when I say people, I mean people who look like me, white men, struggle with the idea that, like, well, I watched Alien, and I empathize with Ripley. Why can't women? What's the problem there? And I think it's just because it's about defaults, and about when you're always of the understanding that a protagonist is similar to you, or you mostly see them and look like you. Then when they don't look like you, you can still identify with them because they're a protagonist, and you understand what a protagonist is. But when a little girl or a person of color sees someone who looks like them, that means more to them because they've not seen it before. And when you think about the female characters in Mario Wonder, and you're like, well, if I want a better world, don't I want my daughter to want to play as Luigi as much as she wants to play as Peach? And that is not the world we live in right now. It is a much more complicated subject than it's well beyond the scope of this talk. But I do like to touch on it when I talk about this broadly, because I think it clicks, because people do see it in their own lives.
April O'Neil here.
What's that?
April O'Neil here.
Yes.
Yes, that's who I was. Do you have a favorite Mario character to play as?
I tend to play as Luigi because I was a middle child, and so Luigi that felt like who I was when I was a kid, right? I think as an adult, I've definitely I've thought a lot about how I play games, and I tend not to put myself in there. When I was a child, I certainly did, but I love playing as Peach in Mario Wonder, and I'm really into the new Peach game, by the way, which is amazing. But I also recognize the privilege I have to be able to set a lot of that aside and just pick something based on my sense of aesthetics or my sense of my sort of artistic affinity. I get to do that because I grew up without the barriers that would keep me from being able to do that. So Luigi is the answer.
Which character do you hate?
What's that?
Which character do you hate?
Which character do I hate?
Yeah.
We're talking Mario universe, so like, I can't think of any.
Okay, so let's talk the kissing game.
Yeah.
At what point does the response to the game become the message? Like the controversy is actually the message. Does that make sense?
I think I kind of understand what you're saying. I think I'd push back a little bit because I saw this. I have a long-standing grudge against this game, so which is not fair. Like I say, I think it is. I do want to make it really clear. Like, someone took this chance, and like I think they totally failed. But like, good God, like, congratulations for having the courage to try it. I mean, I think they stopped before they should have. They stopped before they were done, right? I've endless criticism for their approach, but like, it's an important thing for them to have tried. But I think the reason I push back a little bit on that is because I've watched people play it. I was at Indiecade, I think 2015, when they were showing it off, and my first reaction, I was seeing people play it and laughing, and because it's funny, physics, and seeing people do it, just thinking like, oh, no one's actually getting this message. And then searching for Let's Plays, my intent was to say, I want to see how the reaction of this is. Because I knew what I had seen, I knew my reaction to it, I'd seen other people's reaction to it from back when. But when I wanted to go dig in the past and find those Let's Plays, I was expecting more of a mix. More of a people being like, oh, I don't quite understand this, or oh, like I get the point of it. But like I said, that is clips from every single Let's Play I found. And you know, not a fair test because Let's Plays have a heightened presentational sense. So there's maybe a little bit of that influences that I can't quite account for. But I think in that instance for that game, I think it is an unqualified disaster in terms of how that comes across. I think the quotes I highlight in that reel of people really, the things they say and the message they take away from that. Now the question is, then they read about it, they read the artist's statement. Does that change them in one way or another? Which is the more powerful message, right? Because the people in those videos say those things and come off that way because they're a product of their culture, and then the game did not work to fix that? Or is that the game is reinforcing those things? I mean, maybe I am being too hard on it. Maybe it's not reinforcing those things, it's just bringing them out. But it's not making those people, you know, any less, you know, likely to appreciate the message of consent at the heart of it. And then maybe the article on Polygon made them think about it more, and it was a success, the sum of it. I think that's broader than any of us can know for sure. But I think if you wanted to make a game where the reaction was, where the player is meant to reflect on their own response, which is a very powerful thing. Films do this, where when they show violent scenes, they do play them up in a way that is meant to be titillating to an audience, but then they frame them in a such that you're actually meant to feel a little bad about your own reaction. But that it needs to be in context with the experience. And I think if that was your intent, to showcase a game about consent, where you played as someone and you just understood your learned behaviors, you understood how this thing works, and then it reveals to you more, then that would be a powerful thing. This game does not do that. This game intends to, from the start screen, it expects you to get the message, and that's it. And I think because it's a fun, silly game, they kind of forgot to do the rest of the homework, I think.
All right, I want to tackle this from a little bit of a different angle now. So everything that you've been saying about messaging so far, there's an implication that someone is taking the time to figure out what is the messaging doing what I think it's doing? But implicit in that is you have the time and the resources to figure those things out.
Right.
Now, for me, one of the things that I'm dealing with for my current game, Dice Tower, is that it's a platformer where you control a character that in current story terms doesn't have a specific purpose for looking or behaving the way that they do, but because essentially I don't have the time or resources to contract someone to make multiple versions of this character, there is one singular representation, and that's something that I've gone back and forth on a lot, where that's ideally what I want to do, but I don't know if I can afford to put in the time and the resources in order to get that outcome. So I wonder how much of this kind of stagnation or singular messaging comes down to, do I really have the time to change the message to say something that I really want to say?
Right, so you're talking about character select is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I will say I won't have any comment on that because I think there are games which do a really good job where character select is part of the messaging, and other games which are like, this is the character we're writing, and this is the character you're playing at. And I think that I don't have a preference. As a player, I might have a preference, but as a designer, I don't think there's a wrong way to do that. I will say that you're thinking about it right, which is that like, if I can't do character select, I want to, but I can't. So then you kind of are burdened with making your character, understanding how it comes off contextually within the setting of your world, whether it's fantasy or abstracted or realistic. You kind of are burdened with understanding what that is. And I think when you say lack of time and resources, I think that is an out. I think that lack of time and resources is why a lot of indie games are missing a lot of things. But I think if we want to say games are art, you have to put in the time to understand that. And I think that's not fun to say, and I don't want to like point a finger at everybody in the room or everyone in the world and say like you're all bad at this. But I think as a medium, we don't realize that, I guess because we can't just get away with it because no one's telling us that like you should probably think a little bit more about what your game says, which isn't to say you need to spend 50% of your time doing that. But I think looking cool, working right, playing well, none of that work does that, I think. And I think we're so exhausted from doing those three things. So incredibly exhausted. Like, it's pretty depressing to say games are hard. Now let me tell you all about how they're harder than you can possibly imagine. But like I said, if we want games to be art, and honestly, we don't have a choice in that. Games are art, right? Like, if you say, well, my games aren't art, my games are just fun. Like, sorry to tell you, like, your games are art too. Now, the consequences, you have to also think about that, right? Like, well, you know what, my little abstract game, my little indie platformer, I don't have the time to even think about how it's coming off to people. You can be heartened to know that the consequences of the misinterpretation are pretty low. It depends on frankly, how artsy-fartsy you are. Like, I want to care, sometimes people really, really care about the last pixel. There are other people if you want to be obsessively thinking about your messaging and the meanings and the expressions, that same kind of obsession can apply. That said, you can also say, you know what, I don't care about every last pixel. And people will still say that art looks pretty good. And so you could also be a person to say, listen, I'm going to care a little bit, but I'm going to budget. Because what I think I'm telling people is, please care about this. But at the same time, like with everything else it's a multidisciplinary art form. It all has to be taken in moderation. And like, I can't tell you how much to care about that part of it. I just hope that you think about it instead of just knowing you can get away without thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think the angle that I'm trying to convey is that of there's only so much I can do with what I have. Now, like if you're writing a book, it's one person controlling everything. I mean, assuming there's not multiple authors and whatnot, but you have one person that can control literally everything that goes onto the page. With a film, it can be a team of people, varying size, but the outcome of that is one film, one representation. So in the end, you still have a high degree of control of what gets put on the final film. With a game, there's a lot of varying ways that things can come out based on what you put in, and every variation that you put in increases the amount of time it takes to evaluate all of the combinations of things that you've put in, to the point where at some point, unless you have infinite amount of time and infinite amount of resources, there has to be choices about what you choose to put in. And not that doesn't mean you can't think about these things, but it introduces a scope of how far you can actually go with finding the right thing before you just run out of time and resources.
You're absolutely right, and I want to make a comparison by just shifting a couple things. So let's say you have a game design, you've got it all on paper, and you're like, I'm going to have 100 different enemy types in my game. Awesome. That's so fucking cool. It all lines up. I've designed it perfectly. It's not too many. People are going to tell me it's too many, but I've designed it in such as 100 enemy types. But you know what? I only have the art budget for like 3 of them. Okay, I'll make 3, and there's 4 categories. So like that doesn't really work. But you know what I'll do? I'll make 3 types, and then for the 4th type, I'll just like warp the mesh. And then for all the different variations, I'll do like color swaps. And like that'll work fine. And then you'll get terrible reviews from people being like, there's so many enemy types, but there's only a couple of art styles. That's essentially exactly what I'm talking about here. If you think you're designing a game where there's so many possible interpretations, or I have so little time to really think about my message and how I'm delivering it to people, or I can't really think about how this is going to interact with the message I'm trying to deliver here, or whatever, then maybe what you need to do is scope down some of your other things so that thing is now digestible. And because we think about that in a lot of other different areas. We say like, oh, we only have enough art for a couple of enemy types. Well, you know what? If we change the weapon types down, we'll have a little bit more art budget. And then I know it's going to hurt the design, but I'm going to take it down to 50 enemy types, because that's what I have budget for everything else. the 100 types, it was so good. It was so good, you guys. 100 types, it was perfect design. And I could prove it. But you know what? I didn't have the budget for the things I needed to make that work in the multidisciplinary field. And when you talk about how games are different from film and from books, and that means that there's so many more possibilities for getting it wrong, I would hope you flip that on its head. There's so many things you can do with it. That should excite you. That should, I mean, because we just as a medium have not engaged that space, I think, enough to know that that's not something that's scary. That's something that's thrilling. And I hope that's something that you all take away from it, because it can be very depressing. But I hope it can also be really inspiring and very hopeful, because games are so much more powerful than those mediums because of that fact.
Cool. Good talk.
Hello, Mark.
Hey.
I thought it was really cool that you brought up the fact that the game actually continues outside of the TV or the computer monitor. This was one thing that I really started to notice when we were developing Joggernauts.
Joggernauts is a great example of that, absolutely.
Yeah, and I really started to notice that when people would like still be talking about it afterwards, you know, or like, I think that's the reason why we kept really pursuing it, you know, and we thought a lot about all the stuff you're talking about. Like, you know, we didn't put any human characters in it because we didn't want to alienate anybody. They're all aliens. But still, it was like, how do we make this game fun for everybody? Because the whole idea of the game is anybody can play it, and it's about working together. So like everybody should be represented in some way or shape or form. So I was pretty excited when I saw that depth of like outside of the TV interactions, and we started using it in pitching material. We started using like, you know, this game you'll lose friends, you know, with this game, and it made it more than it could have been just on screen. So yep. I think that like what you're saying about that is totally right and cool, that, you know, people are starting to see that sort of depth in games.
And I will, just to praise Joggernauts a little bit, because yeah, it's like, it's a game that tests friendships, right? But what it actually does is it teaches cooperation, because it gives you tools to mess up other players. And there are consequences to doing that. And those consequences are not in the game, they're on the couch. And so I think that dynamic is really important. And the fact that you give players the ability to mess things up at will, I think that's a really, really strong thing. And at indie scale, it delivers something that is a very complicated social dynamic and message for people. And it's not something that people walk away from being like, oh, that game really made me think, right? It's like, no, it made them behave and understand. Yeah, and I'm glad that you guys caught that early and were able to leverage it, because that's an example of finding a thing that works, right?
Thank you for sharing the kissing game. That's something that I had not seen before, and as a first-time viewer, I appreciated that, and I also appreciated when you mentioned that the game began at the start button. That got me thinking about ways of improving it, ways of onboarding, especially. And you likely have been in situations in your life where you've been in the wrong meeting. Like, you realize that you're the odd one out. Or you might not go to a little boutique art house for a film expecting to see certain, I almost said AAA movies, like big screen Hollywood films. And that's the thing that I think was really lacking in here for the people. When you're watching the Let's Play videos, almost a bit of a schadenfreude, a little bit of laughing at their mistakes because they didn't get the message what this game was even about. There was no box art available for them for the onboarding. And so I think it's a little bit sad. I feel a little bit of empathy for them being put on stage in the wrong message, having the background of conventions of like, they're not collecting coins, they're not getting to the next level. So got to thinking more about that magic circle of who's going to be invited to this game, what's going to be experienced. And I really love your through line in all of these of having that meaning behind the game experience and thinking about that. Because there's oftentimes I've seen artwork where people look at it and like, I don't get it. And that level of engagement is often either handed to you in a video game or it is, in this case, completely missed.
Yeah. No, and I think it's important when you're playtesting, think about, either recording or taking a lot of notes for how people respond to things you're doing. Because, like in that, with one notable exception, everyone in that compilation, it wasn't their fault, right? Like, maybe they're
shock
attuned
jockeys
to certain
though.
reactions, and
Like,
there's some certain frustrating things to hear them say, but they were spurred to that by the game. And when they're put on display like that, like I just did, like they do look bad, at least certainly the way I'm framing it, and that's not fair to them, right? And so think about, your work's position in other people's lives is a really valuable thing to think about. Not just, am I going to get a good review? Are they going to like it? Like that's one thing. It's important to think about that, but that's not the end of your relationship with your player.
Oh, this better not be about chess. Just kidding.
Okay, so this is partly me feeling bad about how I ended the second part of our dialogue because it sounded really flippant when that's not at all what I meant for it to be. But I think
Well, let me interrupt you and say I didn't get that. I think you're good.
Yep.
Okay.
But I think where you've got to where it comes down to things like this is all about trade-offs. That's where I'm really looking at it too, because like I'm thinking about the messaging, and by thinking about the messaging, it's doing what you're arguing that we should be doing as game developers in thinking about the messaging. The decision that comes out of it is going to be based on a lot of factors, but the act of actually putting thought into that I definitely agree with, and I think that's what you were arguing as well.
Yeah, for sure. And again, like I was saying in the sort of middle of the talk, sometimes you just want what you're saying to be very small. Yes, you're an artist, but like you're not trying to change the world. You're not trying to solve climate change. You just have a little thing you want to say. That doesn't necessarily mean your job is small, but also you shouldn't feel burdened with making your thing a big statement. I think small art is really valuable, and it should be really valued, but sometimes it's not easier.
Hi, good talk, great prompts. One thing that was going through my mind is I love 4X games, Civilization in particular, and I think that's apropos where you're obviously dominating, exploiting civilizations and people, and how do you design the narrative around that? But the point that it sparked is I recently read Sid Meier's autobiography, and I was excited because there was part of that where he leaned into the criticism of how do you deal with exploitive games. And I was excited when he got to that part of the book where he acknowledged the criticism, and then I don't remember exactly what he said, but I felt let down, and where he basically sidestepped and said, well, it's not that deep, that's how we did it, it was fun, moving on. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Yeah, and I think, you could apply my rubric and really just take everyone to task for not giving this sort of thing enough thought. But I think it's also a choice you make. And sometimes it's a choice based on what you have time for, what you're interested in. And you've seen this in reviews, like responses to Steam reviews, where some player complains about some mechanic or something, and the response is the developer saying, yes, that's not a mistake, we chose to do that, and I know that it's not ideal, and we knew that, but we chose that. And so I have a lot of criticisms about Civilization, particularly its trivialization of the notion of one more turn, as if that's not just as exploitative of a player's time. But aside from that, I think that yes, I feel you. That is disappointing. That it's like, yeah, here's a problem. Well, whatever. Like, that's frustrating. But at the same time, like, it's good at least that he got that far to make that choice, because that's the main criticism I have. If you're someone who makes those mistakes, who doesn't put the right amount of effort into a thing, like, I can't tell you what's the right amount for your game. But if you're not thinking about it, that's where I have a problem with you. But that's actually a pretty low bar to clear. So I think we're all capable. I think the work past that is a lot, but you can certainly be, and you can justify it to yourself, to your players, to the world, that like, you know what, I know this could be troublesome, but I don't have the budget for it, and these other things are so important to me that I'm going to take that risk, that misinterpretation risk. And I think that is still an artistic choice, and you can make it.
Oh my goodness, hello.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, I'm so happy I got to see this talk. Yay. So I love this talk for a million different reasons, but just thinking about it, like I like coming at games from a very like thematic approach, like tone, vibes, like the theming of a game is usually what I go for first. And I honestly am just curious how you would see, or how you see like theming / tone overlapping or being the exact same thing or completely separate from messaging in a game. Just how you see those influencing each other or not.
I will say, if you listen to Nice Games Club long enough, you will start to get annoyed at me saying that everything is everything, because that is truly how I feel. And I think it's easy for someone who is a multidisciplinarian or who is a solo developer who works on multiple different things. It's maybe easier for me to say that because I work in multiple fields. It's much harder when you're on a team of people. You're responsible for art, you're responsible for code, you're responsible for design. Then the togetherness of it all, that's a bigger job, I think, for a team. It's why AAA is the worst at this, I think, which is, again, not exactly their fault, it's systemic. But when it comes to that notion of theming, I think that's a conversation where you have to be ready, especially if you feel really strongly about something, to identify where the sizzle points are with the design, with the structure, with even the scope of other things, with the story, with the other parts of the thing that are, or even just like the art capacity of the project and your theme. Because you might say like, listen, this is the way I want it to look, this is the way I want it to feel, the vibe. But you know what? In order for me to achieve that, it's going to start messing with some of these other things because our scopes are not aligned. So let's talk about that. Let me present my vision, and is it enough to change what you're all working on? And if it's not, then I need to be open to let those restrictions change what I'm working on. And that's, teamwork, and that's the lifelong lesson, But yeah, everything is everything. It really does all come down to that, very annoyingly so.
No, I totally agree. Yeah, that's awesome. Especially on like sort of mid-range size projects for teams or teams where you have multiple people who feel very strongly about different approaches to it. Like if one person cares more about the messaging than the theming, or if people have conflicting opinions on how they or what they should be communicating. It's always really interesting to see how that levels out and ends up in like the final product of a game.
Yeah, I mean, I'll get on my soapbox and I'll say, what you want to say, you should feel strongly about it. You should be deliberate about it. You should let nothing stand in the way of what you want to say or your intention. And I do not think that's contradictory with the fact that all art is compromise. And some of that compromise is to your intent, right? You weren't stopped. That was just the path you took. And so I think the more we understand as an industry that every little damn thing everybody does contributes to that message. It's not the narrative designer's job. They might feel the brunt of it. But the person doing the UI, they're going to have a huge impact because the player's going to see that screen more than most other screens in certain types of games. And so you think about the type of project you're doing, and not everyone has to be good at it. Do you know what I mean? But if everyone understands that they share the burden and the responsibility and the thrill of being able to deliver that message, and everybody's on the same page as to what it might be, and how precise you want to be, what singular thing you want to say versus 30 things you want to say, that's up to your team to decide how specific or how deliberate you want to be with that, or how much you want to leave open to modification as you test. But if everybody understands that they're part of that process, then that kind of interrelation between departments becomes easier. Because you can say like, hey, you know what? I know you worked a lot on this, but it's also important to you that it does this thing. And interacting with the other things, it's not going to do that. So let's, instead of saying, hey, you need to change it, It's like, hey, let's all work together so that can better do what we all want it to do. It's kind of Pollyannish. It's easier said than done, but that's how you make collaborative work.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions?
We exhausted the room. I wouldn't mind a yes to that.
Thank you, Mark.
All right, thank you, everybody. It was really good to have this conversation on top of it as well.
Now I have 2 mics. All right. Well, that is the end of our meeting. It's about 8 o'clock, so I mean, we could hang out here for a little while. Does anyone have any opinions on where we're going? Beth? Okay. Well, why don't we end the stream and we'll hang out and figure out where we're going. Thank you, everybody.